hope to get you guys all excited about applying for a Fulbright in the coming year or two. Speaking about in terms of my experiences, it's really has been a wonderful way to spend my sabbaticals, build my personal and professional networks beyond the US, and establish collaborative research, botanical research across the world. So I'm really hoping that at least a few of you guys will consider applying for Fulbrights, and then I can work with you over the coming months. So this is the plan for today. I'm going to give you a bit about my background in case there are folks in the audience who can kind of share, that I share some of the backgrounds with that you can think about in terms of putting your personal statements together. I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction to what the Fulbright US Scholar Program is about. Then I'll spend a little bit of time talking about my experiences as a Fulbright US Scholar to South Africa and to Sri Lanka, with some side trips to Madagascar and India. And then I want to talk about how I approach my application. I mean, that's important in terms of thinking about how to kind of put together these applications, which have both short answer questions as well as a project statement. Then I want to give you some insights, some of the kind of tricks and that I've used in terms of putting together a competitive application. And then if there are questions, you can definitely hang around after the talk, and then we can chat. And then better, if you have already started your application, we can have Zoom sessions along the way to help you fine-tune your applications and statements. So a bit about my background. I was born and raised in Sri Lanka. I spent my early years in Japan, and Japanese was the very first language I learned how to speak. I came back to Sri Lanka and finished my secondary education there. And right around the height of Sri Lanka's civil war, I got into university, so it was not the best time to pursue an undergraduate degree in Sri Lanka. So I applied and came to the US in 1990. I went to a very small liberal arts college on the East Coast called College of the Atlantic that Miranda knows about. But very, very small school, and I was really grateful to have that opportunity to go there as an undergrad. Went on to do my graduate work at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, did a postdoc in California, and I've been a faculty member in botany over the last 19 years, just finishing my 19th year at the end of this academic year. So as you can see, I've been on the move my whole life. I've always felt like I was an outsider trying to immerse myself in new settings and make wherever I am my new home. So that when I heard about Fulbright, you can imagine how excited I was. I mean, I felt like it was like meant for people who just want to keep traveling and seeing the world and learning about the world from the people of those places that you interact with. So if I could, I really would do a Fulbright for the rest of my life. Unfortunately, that's not possible, but I'm hoping that I can live that Fulbright experience through the experiences that you may have in the coming years. So briefly about my Fulbright journey. So my first Fulbright was when I was at College of the Atlantic, a very small school, undergraduates only, teaching institution. So I applied for a Fulbright to go to Sri Lanka, which is where I'm from. And I got that award, and I spent that academic year in Sri Lanka, mostly doing research at an institute called the Institute of Fundamental Studies, but I also got to visit a number of universities across the island to give lectures and meet with undergraduate and graduate students. What's cool about the Fulbright Award is that once you get a Fulbright Award, many of the regions where Fulbright is offered have these 2-week regional travel program grants. So they send you to some other country in the region, and you can go there to give lectures, establish new collaborations, meet with students, do a workshop. So I ended up in India, and I'll talk a little bit about that experience later. And that was a really great way to establish, cool collaborations with people that I had, I knew of their work, but I had never had an opportunity to meet with them in person. So I loved the Fulbright so much that many years later, I decided when my sabbatical came up that I was going to apply for another Fulbright. I applied in 2022, 2023, just after the pandemic. So it was kind of a good timing. People were back doing things in person rather than on Zoom. So I ended up in South Africa. And then, of course, the highlight of that trip, South Africa was great, but of course I got to go to Madagascar. And a biologist as a botanist, I mean, it's a dream come true. One of the most biodiverse regions of the world. And I was there only for 14 days, and I'll show you some of the things that I saw, in addition to some of the projects that I was able to get started during that time I was there. So if you're interested in Fulbright, right, and one of the things I would recommend you do is, obviously you're thinking about a particular country, a particular region. This is a great place to go. It's called the Fulbright Scholar Directory, and you can go find Americans who've gone to the country of your interest or to that institution that you're thinking about. You can say, okay, I'm going to want to go to England. I want to go to Kew Gardens. You can do a search by the institution name. You can do a search by the country to see who else has gone there. And you'll be surprised. You're going to run into people that you may have interacted with professionally along the way. Then you can reach out to them saying, hey, tell me about your experience. How was it? What did you think about that institution? What did you think about that city? What did you think about living there and working there, right? So it's a great way to kind of start the process by making a list of folks who've been there and then contacting them for additional information. Right. So because my kind of fascination with kind of these experiences I've had and the need that kind of passion I have to kind of share these experiences with others, I decided that I was going to apply for this Fulbright Ambassador Program. And I was one of 12 folks who were selected for the next 2 years. And BSA is the first talk I'm giving. So this is my very first kind of big talk that I'm going to give to encourage people to apply for Fulbright. So one of the things we've had to do as Fulbright alumni ambassadors was to describe our experience as a Fulbright scholar in one word. So I'm going to put all of the words that came up during our meeting. So these were the words that came up. I mean, almost everybody came up with, a very kind of transformative, influential experience. They were fun, they were relaxing, refreshing, educational, but the general theme across everyone was that it was a life-changing experience. So, right, I mean, it's a really cool way to spend a year abroad, immersed in a new setting, sharing your knowledge and learning from each other. So there are lots of, personal, professional, institutional impacts that these folks talked about. And I'm going to touch on some of the personal, professional, and institutional impacts that I experienced during my time in South Africa and Sri Lanka with the 2 regional travel trips to Madagascar and India. So one of the things I want to point out is that there are so many different kinds of Fulbright awards, right? So I heard one of the Fulbright staff members once say that there's a Fulbright for everyone, but not every Fulbright is for everyone, right? So if you're a student, you apply for a different program. If you are a person with a professional degree, you apply for a different type of a program. So you need to navigate the Fulbright program website. So this is where you want to start, right? The Fulbrightprogram.org, and then go through the various opportunities, awards they have, and see whether you are eligible to apply for those. So today's talk is on the Fulbright US Scholar Award, and that's for folks who have a professional degree, right? So if you have a PhD in botany, or if you're about to get a PhD in botany, and you will have that degree by the time you start your award, you can then apply for a US Scholar Award, right? So this is what you want to do. You want to go to that Fulbright Program.org website. You click on the Apply tab. You go to all programs, right? And then you end up on this page, and then you are looking for opportunities for US citizens, right? If you have colleagues or friends, or if there's anybody in the audience who's not a US citizen, then you go to the tab below that, right? So there are different opportunities for Americans, there are different opportunities for non-American US citizens, and there are opportunities where your institution can apply. It's an institutional application to bring people into the university, right? So there are many different types of awards. Right. So once you go to the US Citizens tab, if you're a student, meaning you can be an undergraduate, you can be a graduate student who's currently doing their master's or PhD, you go to the student tab. Today, we're going to talk about the scholar tab. If you're a teacher, secondary school teacher, there are awards for secondary school teachers, primary school teachers, and there are professional awards for people like artists and others who have terminal degrees in their field, right? So many, many different kinds of awards. Once you go to the Scholar Award, you'll see that there are so many different kinds of awards, right? So, I mean, there are thousands of awards given out every year for Americans who travel abroad and for non-US citizens to come to the US. And this is why I love this program. It's truly a multicultural exchange, an educational and cultural exchange program, right? And it's one of the largest in the world, and it is a very prestigious award as well. So, I encourage people to consider this, right? So today we're not going to go through all of these different awards. We're going to go through the Fulbright US Scholar Program Award, which is the most kind of relevant one for people who are members of the Botanical Society, right? So once you go there, then you can, these awards under the Fulbright Scholar Program are to go teach, to do research, or a combination of research or teaching, right? So and then once you kind of decide that this is where you want to go, you can click that link and it will take you to a page that tells you the eligibility requirements for the various awards that are available, right? So this is a kind of so then once you click there, you find the award that you are interested in, and you end up in this page, right? So again, you can do some keyword searches by discipline, by institute, by country, and then you end up, with this kind of table right here that lists all of the awards for this coming year. So there are 402 awards found under the Fulbright US Scholar Program Award for this year, right? So you can look at the activity type, or you can click on the award title. Once you click on the award title, it will take you to the award, and it will tell you how long it is for, what the stipend is going to look like, and what the expectations are in terms of eligibility, right? So then I guess the next step is to start your application if you decide that this is what you want to apply for. And that's where I can come in to help along the way. When you're putting together your proposal for your application, you can always send me an email and ask me questions about, the process itself. But even in terms of picking an award, if there are questions, feel free to reach out to me at any point. I'm happy to share my thoughts on that as well. Okay. So the one we're going to talk about today is called the Fulbright US Scholar Program. 400 awards in 135 countries for the coming year. It's mostly for college, university faculty, postdocs, and other professionals who have terminal degrees in their field. You can go to teach, to do research, or the combination of two, right? So lots and lots of opportunities. And that's why it takes a little bit of time to find the right award, make all the necessary arrangements, and then start thinking about putting your application together. So this is a good time to start thinking about applying if you're thinking about this 2016, September 16th deadline, which is the deadline for the US Scholar Program Award applications. So as I mentioned earlier, there are teaching awards, there are research awards, teaching plus research awards, and they can range from anywhere from 3 months to 10 months, right? So you pick the duration that you want. You don't have to go for a year, right? Most people with families might find it difficult to go spend a whole year. They might want to do just a semester abroad, or go spend 2 quarters abroad, right? So I've spent 10 months and 11 months for my 2 Fulbright awards, because I found the longer duration ones, you really get a better feel for what the country. You have more time to put together to get the work done, right? So I ended up, the first one was for a research one to Sri Lanka. And then I kind of missed the whole student interaction component. And that's where I started like traveling to universities and meeting with students. So the second one, I decided that I was going to apply for a teaching and research application. So that way I get to do both, right? So as Miranda pointed out, I'm broadly, I think of myself as a geoecologist. I'm interested in how geology, mostly like parent materials, shape diversity of plants and lichens. I do descriptive work. I do experimental work. I also am involved in some applied studies in terms of conservation and restoration of harsh environments. So both of my Fulbrights had to do with geoecology collaborations. I wanted to kind of get involved in projects that were ongoing in these countries, or help them think about establishing research projects that were going to benefit their students in those particular countries. So that was my focus, to kind of set up agendas for research in South Asia as well as in Southern Africa. So the first one was to Sri Lanka. It was for 10 months. I found and a bunch of ecologists, botanists, and interested in plants of harsh environments. And I reached out to them and I said, hey, this is what I've been doing. I would love to come and work with you to set up kind of a series of research projects, going from very descriptive, like floristic surveys, to experimental work on lichens and plants that grow on the understudied serpentine outcrops of Sri Lanka. So there are about 6-7 serpentine outcrops in Sri Lanka. Very little work was done previously. And I wanted to go set up some projects with them, and so that their graduate students and graduate students could take on and continue the work. So I got to work with botanists, lichenologists, and environmental scientists They were at different institutions. So my host institution, was my primary place, but I did reach out to other institutions and got letters of support from them saying, hey, we would love to come have an opportunity to work with you. So this letter of support and letter of invitations from the host institute is a critical component of your application. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But other than the whole research component, what I really enjoyed doing was going to universities and secondary schools and talking to kids about natural history and ecology, right? So once you get a Fulbright, I mean, you've got to do what you're supposed to do, but there are all these other opportunities you can to travel within the country and establish, lots of connections across from students all the way to faculty and other people who are working in the private sector in the environmental sciences. I even went and gave a whole week of classes at the high school I went to in Sri Lanka, which was really a cool experience. Then, of course, when I found out that there was an opportunity for Fulbright scholars to get a 2-week grant to go to a regional country, I, wanted to go to India, because even though I grew up in Sri Lanka, I had never been to India. I mean, it was 30 miles north, never been there. So I thought this was my opportunity to go to India. I looked up the literature and I found some researchers at this Aligarh Muslim University working on plants on metal contaminated soil, reached out to them and I said, hey, I've got this 2-week opportunity. Would you like to host me? And the thing to remember is when you write to people around the world saying that you're applying as a Fulbright scholar, or you are, getting a letter of invitation saying you're applying for a Fulbright award, most people will jump at that opportunity because they think of Fulbright very, highly in many countries. Everywhere I've gone and I've said I'm a Fulbright scholar, doors open up. I mean, like, people are willing to engage with you. So you've got that advantage. So even though that getting that letter might sound like a difficult thing to do, like once you start sending letters out, you're bound to get somebody who is interested in working with you, right? So I went there, I gave a bunch of lectures at this university. It's a very old and a large university. I went to multiple departments, met with a lot of students, and a lot of the students I worked with are now in the US doing their postdocs or graduate studies. So that was another cool thing that I was able to do, help people put together applications to come to the US for their higher education. And another thing that Fulbright does is they do regional conferences where they bring people from, for example, South and Southeast Asia to one country to have a week-long conference where you present your work and meet with other Fulbrighters from the US who are in different parts of that region. So I met people from Americans who've gone to Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan and Sri Lanka. So it was really good to kind of network with people who were Americans, but doing various types of projects, not just in botany, but across all disciplines in other parts of South Asia. And from a personal front, I mean, it was really an opportunity for me to rediscover Sri Lanka. I left Sri Lanka when I was 19, and 26 years later, I managed to go there for a full year, the longest I've gone back for since I left Sri Lanka during the Civil War, connected with my childhood friends, and of course, spent a lot of time with my parents, and saw Sri Lanka from a different kind of lens, after not being there for so long. So Fulbright became something that I was really excited, thought was a really great opportunity for not just for me, but also for the students that I work with, because once I established connections in other countries, that opens doors for students that I work with in America to go to those countries. And it has happened now in Sri Lanka and India. And then, of course, there were opportunities for Sri Lankan and Indian students to come to the US for graduate work as well as postdoctoral opportunities. When I had this next opportunity to apply for a Fulbright, I picked South Africa partly because I knew my host through a very long relationship. I mean, I met Stefan Siebert, who is now a geobotanist in South Africa, in 1999 at the very first international conference I attended. Right. So this was right after my master's. This is the paper that ended up in AJB. I went and presented this work in South Africa, and my roommate was an Afrikaner from University of Pretoria. And we were in our mid-20s, and we were at the very first conference, international conference, either one of us has attended, and we became friends. And that friendship lasted over the decades. And when I had this opportunity to go apply for a second Fulbright, I reached out to Stefan and said, Stefan, what do you think of me coming over and spending a year with you and your family? And he wrote back, highly enthusiastic, yes. So that was my ticket to South Africa. I had a host. It's not required, but if you have friends and collaborators you already have, those are people you could reach out to if you are interested in going and working with them in country, right? So Stefan and I, in 1999, we attended the third International Conference on Serpentine Ecology. That Stefan and I way in the back with Richard Walker, Art Kruckerberg, some of the giants in this field back in the day, about 6-7 American botanists in this group, and many, and the rest are from about 40 countries. This was at Kruger National Park, and this is where I met Stefan. So I applied to go work with him and got the award. So I was at Northwest University for 11 months during 2022-23 academic year. During this time again, even though I was teaching a class that Stefan and I put together called geoecology, and I also wanted to go to other universities. So I went to 13 universities and research institutes across the country and gave seminars, met with botanists, and established a huge kind of network of collaborators across the country. I wanted to point one thing out, though. The class that I put together as a new class for the Northwest University curriculum, geoecology, is a class that I'm currently teaching at Cal Poly. So I put it together with Stefan to teach in South Africa, but then I brought it back and, of course, kind of fine-tuned it for California. But I'm teaching it for 24 students, upper division botany class. It's been lots and lots of fun. And Stefan and I talked recently, and he said that when he applies for a Fulbright to come and be with me, that he wants to co-teach this class at Cal Poly with me. So that is the kind of thing that Fulbright is looking for, like true collaboration, like opportunities in both directions. So you've got to put together your proposal with that in mind. It's not an NSF grant proposal, right? Of course, you've got to do research. Of course, you've got to come up with a strong teaching proposal. But it's also about outreach. It's also about cultural exchange, right? So that is a necessary component that you've got to emphasize in your statements, right? So one of the other things that I've done, every Fulbright I've brought American students to the country that I was at, and I've given opportunities for students from those countries to come to America. So one of the things I did this visit was invite TJ, who was one of my undergraduate students at Cal Poly, to South Africa. And actually Miranda is smiling because Miranda met him at Duke recently as well. And TJ came and did a workshop on using this really cool handheld device to look for heavy metal concentrations in herbarium specimens, which is really important for South Africans. I mean, South Africa is a mining country. There's a lot of landscapes that are completely devastated. There is an interest in terms of kind of revegetating these landscapes and using native plants, and also using some of these native plants, not just to clean up soils, but also extract heavy metals from the soil. So TJ kind of went and showed this kind of cool method that now my South African colleagues are working on. We even managed to put together a paper while I was there with TJ, the undergraduate student, as the first author, and the South Africans talking about the kind of the suitability of this device to look for heavy metal in plant tissue. Another thing that I've done through my Fulbright is to bring my American collaborators to the US, to the country that I'm at. So for example, one of the things I did this time was I brought my American lichenology friends to South Africa, because lichenology in many parts of the world, especially in the Southern Hemisphere, is not very well developed. And so we decided that we were going to kind of revive that lichenology field in Southern Africa, brought some of my collaborators from America, and the work that we did led to the discovery of a couple of new genera and several new species of lichens in Southern Africa. So, building capacity in fields that are kind of information gaps are not as well developed. I'm not an expert on everything. So what I've done is obviously bring people that I know who are experts, and you can apply for National Geographic Society grants and Explorers Club grants, on the side to get a few $1,000s to bring. I brought Danielle, who's a PhD student with David Ackley at UC Berkeley. And she has a strong interest in lichenology. and Alan Friday from Michigan State, who is a lichenologist who's done a lot of work in Africa. So he came over and worked with some of the South African young researchers who were interested in kind of learning lichenology as a field. Personal highlights, as a botanist, seeing Welwitschia mirabilis in the Namib Desert was a highlight. This is something that we all read about in our first year biology textbook, but hardly have time to, hardly have never seen. So this was obviously a really cool highlight of my trip. Then, of course, going to the Namib Desert and seeing these lichen fields. These are like acres and acres of these fruticose lichens that are about this tall. They make just forests. And if you put your face on the ground, you see this kind of canopy and the sub-canopy and the understory, all made up of different lichen species. And they are all largely restricted to these gypsum-rich soils in southern Namibia. Of course, I was looking at their spring flora in Northern Cape. Look, many of these are endemic plants. And then what happens is two blue cranes that I've never seen in my life comes and lands right in front of me. And this was the very first photo I took with my new camera, but I was pretty happy with how it turned out. And through this experience, I've developed an interest in photography as well, and also kind of having had kind of more hobbies that I think are important as you are aging, rather than just doing your science. So I took up photography while I was in Africa, and this photo actually won a couple of African awards over the last few months. South Africa's national bird on this like carpet of endemic flowers in the spring in the Northern Cape. I also saw these three ostriches heading towards sand dunes in Gobabe, southern Namibia. And, as a Fulbrighter, I often kind of think of this photo and I think of myself as these ostriches, like getting up every morning, not really knowing what's coming. You're just like embracing the day. You're moving forward, not knowing what's coming at you, which is actually quite a refreshing kind of a way to live your life after kind of being in America and, where work takes over, you have hardly time to do anything else. And I found this kind of time I had really refreshing, and also an opportunity to find like a balance, like a work-life balance that I've been looking for much of my life, but I never found. And in Africa, I actually got work done, taught classes, but I also had time to do other things. Of course, the 14 days went to Madagascar. It was an amazing experience. Met with many institutions there, but Biodiversity Institute, the University of Antananarivo, which is their main institute, and I also worked mostly at the Missouri Botanical Garden of Madagascar. Here, the interest was to kind of develop a research program in geobotany in Madagascar, the only geobotanical work that has happened in Madagascar that has 82% endemism in flowering plants and about 30% endemism in bryophytes, no information on lichens, is on Inselbergs. These are granite and gneiss rock outcrops that people have looked at, and they've found 67% endemism in vascular plants on these granite Inselbergs, but no work on serpentine outcrops. They didn't even know the way that they had serpentine outcrops. And then I pointed out that their largest serpentine outcrop is also one of the world's largest nickel cobalt mines, right? So Madagascar is also a mining company. Their largest outcrop of serpentinite is completely devastated. It's the largest nickel cobalt mine in Africa. But then, while I was there, we did some GIS work, looked at the geologic maps, and we mapped 20 or so serpentine outcrops, going all the way from the dry savanna landscapes to tropical humid forests. So now the plan is to go back to Madagascar and start descriptive studies on these serpentine outcrops along a climate gradient. And so for that, we are working on a bunch of grants, National Geographic mostly, to see whether we could establish research there. But visiting Madagascar was really a dream come true. I mean, since I was a little kid, Madagascar has been a place that I always wanted to visit, mostly for the biodiversity it has. But of course, going to Madagascar, I really connected with the people, the landscape, and the culture. And even despite the language barrier, I mean, it's a French-speaking country. I managed to kind of establish really kind of strong, lasting friendships and relationships. Of course, the highlight was, I had 2 days in the field. Out of my 14 days, I was inside a hall or a classroom and got out for 2 days to the nearest national park and saw 12 or 110 lemurs, saw 27 endemic birds that I photographed and about 40 or so that I saw. So it was really, as a biologist, as a naturalist, had this amazing opportunity to see Madagascar's biodiversity, in person. Lots and lots of relationships that was built that I'm hoping would continue going forward. And then, of course, I've been working on grants with the Malagasy colleagues to go back to Madagascar in the coming years to start our work on the serpentine ecology projects, and also actively searching for advisors across the US who are willing to take some of these Malagasy students as graduate students in the US. I mean, it's a whole world, especially in the botanical field. There's so much that can be done. And what better way to do it than through collaborating with Malagasy citizens and giving Malagasy students opportunities to work in the US. So with that, I want to quickly touch on the application process. Just realize that once you click on that application, you register for the application, you'll see that there are about 3 or 4 short answer questions. One is they all have to be within 2,000 to 3,000 words. So country selection and preparation, right? Why this country? How prepared are you to be in this country? Right? And do you have any previous experiences visiting there? Have you interacted with your host in any capacity? So this is what you write in this particular question. A career trajectory. Are you a postdoc? Are you a graduate student just finishing up and you really want to go to, Kenya to do a project, because that's where a lot of the work in this field is happening, and you've already established a relationship with someone there, and this is the right time in my life. Or it's a sabbatical, or you've just gotten tenure and you're looking to expand your network. So that's what you write there. Cultural preparation, it's not just about that specific country, it's about what is your exposure to other cultures, how have you interact with people, what are the challenges you noticed, how have you overcome some of these challenges when you're working with people from other places. So it's a short answer question that you really need to think about. I think of these short answer questions as very precious real estate, right? You've got to be very careful about these short answer questions. You don't want to repeat yourself, but you want to emphasize as much as you can about your kind of excitement for cultural and educational exchange, but not repeat yourself all over the place too, right? Because you don't have a lot of space to write your responses. If you are applying for a teaching award or a teaching plus research award, you do have a few extra pages to write about your teaching plan, right? So the teaching preparation is a short answer question where you talk about how you approach teaching. What is your philosophy towards teaching, and it could be how you do it here. It could be about how you are going to change your teaching plan to fit the country that you're going to go to. The project statement is important. It's 3 to 5 pages long, depending on whether it's a research statement or a teaching statement versus a research plus teaching statement. I have 5 pages long. And this is where you have to really be careful not to make this too technical. Because remember, your application is first read by the US State Department's Bureau of Cultural and Educational Exchange Division and the Institute of International Education. They're not all, they're not botanists, right? They may have somebody who has some botany background, but the idea is you have to sell your idea, your excitement for a project to a non-botanical audience. So this is where you have to keep things general, right? If you're teaching, you have to upload syllabi and course outlines that you should develop with the host that you're planning to work with. So for example, when I decided to teach geoecology in South Africa, Stefan and I worked for a month or so going back and forth on email, developing our syllabus that would cater to the South African audience, right? Not to a Cal Poly audience. When I came back to to California, I ended up having to, kind of refine it to fit my students here in the US, right? You have to get 2 letters of recommendation. Be very careful about how you pick your letter writers. People who really know you, not just for the research you do, but also for all of the outreach and other types of things you've done in your life, right? You can really talk about, how good of an ambassador you're going to be, US ambassador you're going to be in the country that you're going to go to. The invitation from the host university is important. Some awards already have a university tied to it. In those cases, you don't need letters of invitation because they already are looking for an American academic to come and teach a class or do a research project, right? For those, it's not required. But in my case, I was applying to an all disciplines open award. I needed a letter of recommendation, a host letter. And not only did I get a letter from Stefan, I actually wrote to all of the universities that I wanted to visit, and I got letters from them as well. And you can attach all of these letters into one PDF document, and you can submit it, right, as part of your letter invitation thing. So I think it's a good idea to get, these letters, not just from academic institutions. So for example, if you're going to University of, say Cambridge University in the UK, you could apply, they could write to Kew Gardens or some of the other botanical gardens, asking for letters saying, hey, I would love to come and give a talk or meet with your botanist while I'm in England, right? So get as many letters as you can. This is why it takes time to put together these applications. Quickly, a few insights. It's not an NSF statement. It's not a research proposal like the way you would submit a research proposal for a competitive research grant. It's emphasize cultural educational exchange, make it truly collaborative, get feedback from your host. Don't focus on what you can give. It's a tendency that we all have saying, we are going to do this, right? We are going to teach these people how to do this, right? It has to be also about what you can get out of this experience. Like, what are you going to learn from them, right? So you have to balance what you can give with what you can get. And if you're developing a class to teach, make sure that it's a gap in the curriculum. Don't offer to teach first-year biology when it's already been offered. Find something that seems like an obvious gap in the curriculum and put together a class with your host that would fill that gap. They're more likely to say yes to something like that than you saying, I'm going to come teach introductory botany in, Latvia, right? I mean, so that might not sell as much as putting together a course that is really a gap. Have an outreach component. Just don't talk about your research. Make sure that you go to some high schools, go to some events, go to botanical gardens, go to a national park and try to volunteer, do a workshop in your area of expertise. All of these things are going to be very positive aspects of the application. They love to see this outreach component emphasized. Talk about personal impact that you might have, professional impacts, and how your institution is going to benefit, not just your institution in the US, but also the institution that you're going to go to. Talk about what you're going to be doing after you come back. It's not going to be like a one-time thing. You want to show that you have plans to continue this work, right? And that is something that you want to, maybe just a couple of sentences. I mean, you don't have a lot of space, right? You have 3 pages to write all this, but you want to touch on these components. From what I've seen, those are the applications that really get a lot of high marks during the peer review process, right? So in my case, I've come back. I really think Fulbright is a great way for people to engage with the world. So I've served on the peer review committee. I can't serve on the peer review committee now that I'm an ambassador. I can't tell you guys to apply, help you with your application, then peer review. So that's not going to work. But this gives me the green light to help you with the applications going forward. I have been working with the Cal Poly University to help students with their ETA and study research awards. So that's been fun to work with young students who are thinking about Fulbrights after they graduate. And of course, encouraging you guys to apply for Fulbrights as well. So one of the things that I want to point out is that every institution should have a Fulbright liaison. So this is somebody that your international office is designated, as a kind of a person to help you guys out in terms of getting through the process. I mean, maybe not putting the statements together, but they are often people who've had Fulbrights, right? So they may also be a good contact. So go to this web link, put your university in there and see who your Fulbright liaison is. Not every university has one, but most universities do, right? So it's something to look at. If your institution is interested in bringing people in, there are opportunities for your institution as well. You can bring people from other countries to your university to lecture, to spend a term or 2 terms, and also to help out with language programs. So with that, I'm going to end, and which gives us maybe 10-15 minutes for questions. The best thing to do is, if you're interested, email me. I'll set up separate Zoom meetings with you all. That would be the best way, because every case is different, and I want to be able to make sure that I give you advice that matters to you. And in addition to that, if you're interested in meeting with me at BSA with your full application in draft form, I can meet with you in person and we can go through your application together. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation, and I'm sorry I took a little longer than I should have, but I do want to kind of give you kind of share my experience with you so that you can kind of think about how you want to put your application together as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nishi. Super interesting. And now I'm like, oh, I want to go to all of those places and get to do cool field work everywhere. So for people who have questions, who are on the Zoom, feel free to put them in the chat or just unmute yourself. But I will start with a question or two that I have. So the first thing that I am wondering about is, so it sounds like when you went to Sri Lanka, you maybe didn't have very many collaborators already there, but then when you went to South Africa, you already had a pretty long established collaboration with the person that was your primary host. So I guess I'm wondering, like, does it matter? Is the goal to like form a new collaboration? Does it matter if it's a new or old collaboration, or kind of how do you spin that to sort of, be successful and get to go?
Right. So, so I've seen both strategies, and I think Fulbright really wants people to start new collaborations, reach out, make completely new networks, right? So if you're an established researcher, like you may have those networks. If you're just starting out, you may not have those networks. And that's why Fulbright is great, because you can reach out to people in your area of expertise and say, I would love to come and work with you for a year, right? So yes, I've seen, and while I've been a peer reviewer, I've seen maybe about 50% of the applications I read are from people who already have some kind of a connection to that country, right? Professionally or personally. Sometimes you have second generation Americans or wanting to go back to where their grandparents came from and teach at an institution where their parents went to. So that personal connection seems to be very important. I think people do kind of get attracted to those kinds of statements that have some connection to do, but that's only half the time. I've seen competitive applications where people have never been to Iceland, but that's where their work has to happen, right? And they've done work that matters in Iceland, so they reach out to people there and they get them excited. So I think personally, I felt comfortable. I thought my chances were greater going to Sri Lanka as my first Fulbright because I had a very personal story to tell. And then, of course, me being one of those people who are not necessarily, I would always weigh my options and take the least risky approach, right? So when I thought about my second Fulbright, I thought, well, I think second Fulbrights are hard to get, but South Africa have this really strong established relationship and a very personal friendship with the host. And I thought that would be helpful. So that is why I applied. But I don't think it's a requirement at all. I've seen, I would say at least half the applications are from people who've never been to this country. But there is a disciplinary connection. They're working on the same system, right? So it's an opportunity for them to collaborate and build that system going forward.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. So we have a question in the chat. So for the awards, I guess, that are just for research, is there any like research funding that comes along with that? Or like how do you get the money to do the actual research, or is it assumed that you already have that or your collaborators would have that sort of thing?
Great question. There's no research money, right, from Fulbright. So the Fulbright is a stipend for you to go there. They'll give you a living allowance, to pay your rent. Some programs offer money for regional travel. So when I was in Sri Lanka, for every university I visited, they would reimburse me for my travel cost. In South Africa, that didn't happen. So I paid it out of my stipend, right? But in South Africa, I had a 3-bedroom house with a swimming pool for $300 US, right? So, and my stipend was like almost $1,500 for my rent. So I had money to spend to make that travel happen. So the research money usually comes from, that's why the host plays a role here and the host university. Like Stefan had some money. And again, I kind of put my proposal together in a way that I was tying my project with the ongoing work at the university. So there were graduate students who were doing projects that I could fit into. So so that way there was already money for the project. So it wasn't like they had to find money to do new work, right? I did apply when I was in Sri Lanka. I applied for a National Geographic to bring some collaborators from the US and Australia to Sri Lanka. So that had money for research. So that's how the Sri Lankan research happened. So you can apply for other grants. And sometimes you can get your host to apply for institutional grants. So for example, in South Africa, when I went on my Fulbright scholarship to South Africa, my host got an extra sabbatical, right? So they took him off teaching and said, hey, this time you work with Nishi, and they gave him some research money for some of the work we had to do. So different institutions will have different sorts of setups in terms of research money, but you are not going there with research money. I've seen people combine NSF grants that they already have with international collaborators with the Fulbright. So there's research money there. You're applying for Fulbright to just go there and live that year in that particular country.
Very cool. Yeah. And sort of an extension of that, you also mentioned building these longer term collaborations where then maybe you can bring people from your host country to your lab in California, and bring students from the US to the host country. It sounds like the funding for all of that would be external from Fulbright. It's not coming from, or it's not part of the Fulbright award.
No, so for the people from other countries to apply to the US, that is a Fulbright grant. So those
But it's
grants,
a separate one.
It's a separate one.
Yeah,
So
okay.
that is for non-US citizens. So the non-US citizens basically can apply directly through the US embassy in their country, right? So it's through the US embassy or the US Fulbright Commission in that particular country. But the three that I listed at the very end, those are grants that American institutions can apply to bring Fulbrighters in also. So for example, there's a Fulbright lecture fund. Say you go to the directory, you find some botanist working in some really cool area from some country, South America, working at Duke, and then I really am fascinated with that person's research, and I want that person to come to Cal Poly to teach for 2 weeks in one of my classes. Then Cal Poly could apply for the outreach lecturing fund and fly the person from Duke to Cal Poly, right? That's another cool opportunity, because there are hundreds of non-US citizen Fulbrighters in America right now, and they could potentially go back and forth, right? So they can go to other, and it's nice for them to have an opportunity to go from the East Coast to the West Coast or somewhere else in the US to make additional collaboration. So those American universities with a PI could apply for to get the person who's already in America to another US institution.
Awesome. That's so cool. Yeah. Yeah, John, go ahead. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Nishi, yeah, great talk. So yeah, actually I was able to visit Peradeniya University in Kandy. It's a beautiful.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, so I was there recruiting graduate students for our graduate program. In my former life as dean, now I'm back in the faculty and trying to get research going up and going. So I've been working with a colleague in Szeged University in Szeged, Hungary. And so he would like me to apply for a Fulbright in the future. But I did do, one of my last trips was a Fulbright International Administrators Award to France, which I did in 2022. And because of the restrictions on applying, you're limited to an application every, I believe, 3 years since you come back. Yeah. And I came back in late October 22, which means technically the earliest I could apply is like 26 or 27. So it's many years out in the future. And I noticed yours were also about 5 years apart.
Yeah, mine was 5 years apart. But back then, though, John, I think it was 5 years. And then suddenly it's now 2 or 3 years. But I think the best thing for you to do is actually write to Fulbright, for Hungary, the person who is in charge of the Hungary region for the Fulbright program. Because, there are times that, you're right on that kind of, it would be great if you can apply for 26, right, rather than 27. But I think asking them, plus you went on an administrative award. It's not a US Scholar Teaching Research Award. So sometimes.
Yes, it is different. Technically it still falls under that restriction, but you're right. You can always ask. I hadn't thought about that. I could just say, hey,
I would ask, and I can also reach out as well on the side. If you can just drop me an email with your question, I can forward it to one of my Fulbright contacts and get the correct answer to you, because you should apply, definitely. You've already gotten a feeling.
Well, there's actually a program in Hungary at Szeged University in biology, which is it's like, and it's summer, it's like the perfect Fulbright. I was just unfortunately, he's like the project that we were going to work on, his funding will be running out, before I could actually get over there. And so you had mentioned, because I know there's no research funding.
Right.
But okay, yeah, I guess I can just write to him. We had hoped to
John,
take a class of students over this summer, but I didn't get enough to sign up, so the course didn't make. But we could try that again in the meantime. But okay, yeah, might as well write to them and see if there's any chance of applying earlier than the
can I also suggest
27th. Yeah.
Can I suggest another option for you? There's something called the Fulbright Specialist Program Grant. It's not administered by the Institute of International Education. It's administered by the World Learning Organization.
Yes,
And
my
that,
associate dean I just was reference for her. She just got named that for our university.
so I would
Yeah.
say that I don't think the 2-year, 3-year waiting time applies for that, because it's through a different organization that works with the US State Department, right? So for example, if you want to go this summer, you could potentially, I think, because you get on a roster, right? You apply and then the host institution applies. So
Yeah.
now you're on kind of Fulbright specialist roster, and then they'll match you, right? And that
Yeah,
is,
she's hoping to go to Indonesia here soon and help them with some curriculum stuff. So, but okay, yeah, no, it sounds good. I mean, yeah, I'm definitely going to be applying as soon as I'm eligible. We may just have to, he may have to get another European grant in the meantime.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I think, it's one of those things. I mean, there are ways to find, little pockets of money. There are pockets of money here and there that you can apply for. And I think, and either through, if they're already interested, I mean, they're going to be looking for money. Sometimes I found that for them, it's easier to find money sometimes for the kinds of things that we want to do. For example, like when I was in South Africa, they never said that they didn't have money for
Yeah.
the small amounts of money I required. They always found it, right? And it's
he basically said if I just paid my airfare over there, they would find accommodations and stuff. But obviously having the Fulbright stipend helps, and that not having to rely on them to do all that. So
yeah, the Fulbright specialist is shorter, 6 weeks, $200 a day stipend, and they'll take care of your flight and moving stuff, the travel related expenses. So it's not a lot of money. It's not as big as a Fulbright Scholar Award, but it's still enough for you to go and spend a month or so there.
okay, yeah, I'll look into that. Like I said, my former associate dean just got approved for that, so I can talk to her about the application process. So
cool.
All right, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Hopefully,
Okay.
I hear from you and look forward to seeing you on that list down the line.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, well, it's just about 3 o'clock on the East Coast, so I do have a few more questions, but I can save those for another time probably. So
I'm fine with that. If you want to ask questions, I've got another 10 minutes. Miranda, it's up to you. You're the busy one.
I'm not sure I'm the busy one, but one person was asking about what kinds of language requirements exist. Yeah, and specifically they're like, I don't have the language of the host country, but I'd really like to go.
So, I've seen applications where people say, so some obviously have no language requirements. South Africa didn't, right? Some say kind of beginner's level understanding, conversational language requirement, right? Some more advanced. But I've seen a lot of people apply saying that they're already taking an online language class, in preparation for this trip, and they've gotten awards even without being able to speak it, right? So
Cool.
so I think you just have to show an effort, right? You show that you're putting in an effort to learn the language. And if they say introductory basic knowledge is, most academic institutions, there are people who speak in English, so it's not going to be that important, but there are ways to get around that. I can talk to them individually if they have that question later on.
Yeah, that's cool. I personally studied Spanish and French for quite a while, and that's definitely helpful, but it's also limiting depending on where you're going to go. And
you should definitely apply for Madagascar, Miranda. I mean,
I would love to.
We should talk. If I get this National Geographic, maybe we could think about building on whatever we do. And I mean, it's an amazing place to be.